Well, good afternoon, good evening. It's 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock Pacific Time. My name is Kirti Khalsa. I'm the CEO of the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation. And it's my utmost pleasure and delight to introduce you tonight to our very special speaker. Before I do that, a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone is muted. And we'll try to keep you muted throughout. For questions, we love your questions. Please put them in the chat. And Dr. Post will talk for about 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes, and then we'll take Q&A. We'll answer your questions at the end. So without further ado, tonight's topic is how to stay healthy and live longer with spiritual practices. And I have a bio that you all have read. I'll introduce Dr. Post, but before I do that, I have to confess to something. What really struck me about Dr. Post is his business card. It says Stephen Post is the president of the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And so what better place, place could we all be in other than being with him tonight? So Dr. Post is a professor of family, population, and preventive medicine and founding director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics. Previously, he was professor of bioethics in the Department of Bioethics of the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. He also taught at the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine. He has received the United States Congress Certificate of Special Recognition in recognition of outstanding achievement, and the Pioneer Medal for Outstanding Leadership in Healthcare from Healthcare Chaplaincy, New York. And I think I don't want to take any more time. I'd like to pass it on to Dr. Post. Welcome everyone, Dr. Post.
Well, thank you, Kirti. The shortest introduction is that he's his wife's husband. We're coming up on our 40th anniversary, believe it or not. So that's been a beautiful ride for us. I'm wearing a weird robe because we had a medical school graduation this afternoon. And I just feel good about it. It's so heartwarming when these wonderful young people swear the Hippocratic Oath and they go off to their residencies. All their parents are there, their siblings. It's one of the most radiant moments of the year. And so I'm still glowing. I'm still glowing from that. Now I'm going to share my screen, Kirti. I think that's okay. Let's see. Can you see that? Can everybody see that?
Okay. Yes, we can.
That's and let's just see if my screen is moving. I think it should be. Yeah, there. Okay. So that's actually a beautiful spiritual masterpiece by the artist Marc Chagall. And I love Chagall because Chagall grew up in a small Russian city, Jewish Hasidic family. He was 19 or so, and his father had a factory that pickled herring, and he assumed that young Marc would follow suit with the family legacy. But Marc Chagall decided that that wasn't his calling. So he went off to St. Petersburg. And for about a half a year, he just sketched portraits on the streets, but he'd never done a real piece of colorful art before. He'd never been a painter, nothing like that. And one night, he tells this story in a book called My Life, which he wrote in his early 30s. He's sleeping in an alleyway on an old mattress. And there's a big, huge, heavy, bearded construction worker who's there next to him on this mattress. And he's kind of Chagall scrunched against the wall. And then he has this remarkable spiritual experience. He just doesn't know if he's awake or asleep, but he sees this incredibly radiant blue angel come down from the sky and fill the whole alleyway with blue. And he had the intuition that blue is the color of love. And then the angel ascended, leaving this beautiful bright blue behind. And so the next morning he did his first painting called The Premonition, which is of a blue angel. And all through his life, he painted in blue because he thought that represented love. And at the end of his life, when he died, he was in his studio outside of Paris, and he was painting a blue angel. And you'll see he's got symbols from every conceivable religious tradition here. And there's also kind of a white circular area in the middle, which he associated with divine energy. So he's really trying to capture the healing energy of love at the deepest level in this image. And it is a thing of great, great beauty. But I wanted to just begin us with a moment of meditation. This is Norman Rockwell's very iconic The Golden Rule. And you'll notice it's not the negative version of the rule, do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. That just means, Jess or Diane, you can get home tonight, and if you haven't elbowed some innocent neighbor in the back, you can feel good about your life. But that sort of minimalism doesn't get us very far. So this is the positive version of the rule, which you see in the Upanishads and in most of the great spiritual writings. Do unto others. Use your imagination and ask yourself, how can I love my neighbor? And love, it's an interesting concept. The definition I use, and it's important to this talk, when the happiness and the security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own, sometimes more so, you love that person. I actually borrowed that from a University of Chicago psychiatrist named Harry Stack Sullivan. When the security and happiness of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own, or maybe more so, you love that person. When you think about it, it holds, whether you're looking at a child in a crib or a grandchild in a crib, or you're having a cup of coffee at Starbucks with an old friend who's had a hard time, whether you're Cicely Saunders starting St. Christopher's Hospice, whatever you might think of in terms of people's love of humanity, it kind of fits very easily into that definition. And it's the secret to healthy aging, and it's a big part of spirituality. When I was a youngster, I'm a little older now, but I'm still immature, so it balances out. That's the key, that's the secret. Okay, don't ever lose the child inside. I really mean that. Be mirthful, even in hard times, not silly, but have a spirit of mirth. So I heard Rockwell, he came actually up to Concord, New Hampshire when I was in a boys' high school up there, a place called St. Paul's, and he lived in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And he painted this in 1960, before the Civil Rights Movement, by the way. And it was the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. And you notice what he's got here. He's got people from every conceivable coloration, from every tradition, spiritual or secular. I think that's him the artist in the denim jacket in the middle, kind of scratching his chin and maybe wondering, as Sartre wondered, is there really any genuine kindness in human nature, or people just after your wallet or your pocketbook or whatever the case might be? And you see folks from every age group, young and old, every gender, and there's no edges to the portrait. He said in his talk, I had the honor of listening to this. He said, there's no edges because he wanted to capture love for a shared humanity, for a common humanity. And he asked us, and I'll ask you, how do these people look? Sometimes people have said, well, a little bit dour, but no, he said they're contemplative, and they're focusing their minds and their energies and their hearts on how they can help others with their gifts and their talents. And he said, every one of us is a wonder of the universe, a miracle of creation. We all have these gifts. And when we find out how to use them to help others, then we've reached our fulfillment of achievement. And he said, do you see the halo? So Diane, do you see the halo in this? Take a look at it. What do you think? It's big and it's round and it's white and it's in the middle. So I didn't see it either, at first. Does anybody see it? It starts with this rabbi's shawl and beard up here, and then it goes around to the toddler's shirt and socks, and then down below to this little African-American girl with her books, and then up above. And he said, if you help others, if you live with a consciousness of how you can benefit the lives of others, he said, you will never grow old. And he said, memorably, that it's kind of like surfing. At first, you have to really paddle hard to catch the wave. But once you catch the wave, it's the energy of the wave itself that moves you along. And all you have to do is balance. It's not so much work. And so he said that the halo is like the balancing once you catch the wave. As you get in the habit of being helpful and kind to others, you get into the flow of this universal energy of love that most of the great spiritual traditions associate with ultimate reality. And by the way, do you see the little girl in the left corner? The black girl with her books in her hands like this. That's Ruby Bridges. She was the first civil rights activist in about 1959 or 1960 down in New Orleans. And she defiantly insisted on attending a segregated school. And this little girl would have all these marshals around her protecting her because the courts determined on her behalf. And she was really the first person to break through the color barrier in that time. Now, what happened to Norman Rockwell? You might have think of him as the guy who painted ice cream cones and sort of silly little scenes in coffee shops. No, he actually got fired for this. They fired him for this. Do you know why? Because the policy of the Saturday Evening Post, no relationship, by the way, but the policy of the Saturday Evening Post was that you could only portray people of color in these sort of trivializing ways and not seriously. So he was fired for this. And he was the most well-known illustrator in American history for freedoms and all his great work. So he went to Look magazine, and the first cover he did of Look magazine was of Ruby Bridges being escorted into a school. So he used his art to inject into American culture a very iconic and beautiful portrait of what it would mean to really have a sense of a shared humanity. I've always loved this. If you go to the United Nations on the second floor, there's a mosaic version of this painting. And it's something to just contemplate. So just think about it. Look at their faces. There are a lot of people in this picture I could point out besides Ruby Bridges, but I won't. It's a great image. Okay. So whatever your age is, this is a study we did of adolescents with addiction disorders. One of the most important things you can do is allow individuals to find a positive community of tender, loving care. And in fact, when they can focus in on caring for others and on spirituality, which is sort of the foundation of AA, people tend to get better. We had a project at Case Western and the Cleveland Clinic and here and at Harvard, helping others live sober. And it's all about adolescence and how much spirituality and community involvement, helping others, volunteering, can free them from addiction and other such things. And so now in a lot of children's hospitals around the country, in addition to treating them medically, they actually connect them with opportunities for service and for giving to others in ways that are loving and deep and unlock the so-called helper's high. So there's this connection between spirituality and giving that I think is universal. This is a wonderful guy that we actually funded, our Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. We've supported probably 80 or 90 studies, and a cluster of them had to do with how do you raise kind children? It's one thing to bring a child into the world. It can be very difficult, don't get me wrong, but we want our children to be kind, and through kindness they can be happy. So this is Lincona, a famous guy who's got a whole cottage industry around this, but basically you want to have in your, say in your kitchen on the refrigerator, a list of family values that you've agreed to with your kids, even pretty young kids. We are kind, honest, respectful. We don't hurt others or lose our temper. Sometimes we do. We express gratitude. We do our chores. We eat as a family with TV and computers off. We do active kindness at school and in the neighborhood, and we volunteer as a family. That's been a really crucial finding in the literature, that when families volunteer across the generations, including the young kids, it's very helpful long-term for those kids to be kinder and to be identified by their peers as such. So this is a study that goes way back to San Francisco in the late 1920s, where researchers from Berkeley followed 300 preteens. They're basically 12-year-olds. And they asked them, what floats your boat? What motivates you in life? What do you want to do with your talents? And about a third of these kids said, well, I want to use my talents to help others, to contribute to the lives of others, like that golden rule image. And then they followed these kids every 10 years of their lives. And they found that the ones who had identified that goal, that purpose, that motive in life, they were protected from depression, from stress-related physical illnesses. And then of those who were still alive in 2010, 2/3 came from the 1/3 who was preteens, felt this kind of calling to give and to help others. And so if you can develop that in your kids through role modeling, through volunteering early in life, you provide a protective halo that will follow them their whole life long, with exceptions. I mean, these are generalizations, but it's very powerful stuff. So Paul Wink, Michelle Dillon wrote a book about this called In the Course of a Lifetime with UCal Press. It's beautiful what we can do. Lots of studies that we funded, 10th grade students who just volunteered 1 hour a week over 10 weeks, vis-a-vis controls. They had reduced inflammation, lower cholesterol, lower body mass index. And that was especially true in those who reported high quartile levels of empathy as an emotional state, as a presence. So they weren't just going through the motions of helping others, but they really felt a certain kind of love of humanity. And so this is important because one of the major problems that young people have now is cardiovascular disease, even in their teenage years. And this is important work. I want to just shift from young people. I'm going to get to old people in a little bit, but mental health. I'm a Clevelander. Anyone been to Cleveland? I don't know. I love Cleveland. Been on Long Island for 13 years. It's a little longer than I expected, but it's been wonderful. This is a place about an hour and a half due east of Cleveland off Route 80 in a town called Mesopotamia. It's an Amish town. And a friend of mine, a woman named Clara Rankin, who's got a lot of resources, her son, she talks publicly about this, came back from school and he had had a schizophrenic break and was not in good shape. She just had this impression that somehow love could heal mental illness. So she bought this 350-acre farm from the Amish and she built Hopewell. You can go to hopewell.cc. It's really worthwhile. And you'll see what it is. People at Hopewell, they go out in the morning to the chicken coop and gather the eggs. They comb the horses. They have an equestrian program. They either have schizophrenia or bipolar. They may or may not need medication. If they do, someone comes in from the Cleveland Clinic, but they use about 1/4 of the usual amount because they're so supported socially. And they practice positive psychology in small groups. So in addition to moral treatment, where they're out, baling the hay and doing things for the community, they sit and they'll talk for maybe 2 weeks. They'll have small group sessions for an hour a day on kindness and what their experience with kindness has been in life or the lack thereof. And they'll keep a journal and they'll go out and they'll actually do kind acts. And they'll debrief at the end of the day. And then they'll shift to another area of positive psychology. They might go to forgiveness for a couple of weeks. And they'll do all sorts of very creative exercises around forgiveness and also reflect on their own lives. And maybe there's somebody who they just feel did them a terrible disservice once upon a time. And they're always pointing the finger in that direction. But forgiveness means realizing that it's good for you to let that go a bit. Doesn't mean reconciliation, but rumination is a very, very destructive emotional state. It raises all of your stress hormones and it'll clog your arteries up with fatty acids. It'll cause hippocampal atrophy. It's one of the stress routes into some degrees of dementia. And it also causes slow wound healing. Those are the 3 non-controversial aspects of protracted high stress hormone. So when you're feeling bitter and hostile and angry and explosive about the world around you, you're really doing yourself a lot of damage over the long run. So what they're doing here is they're talking about forgiveness and they're figuring that out as a real core value. And they'll talk about gratitude. So this is what positive psychology is about. If you think about psychology purely in disease terms, you don't necessarily, that can be effective. It can be useful to talk about depression and so forth. But the big movement in psychology today is in the positive direction. And that comes from Marty Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania and from Sir John Templeton, the philanthropist who originally funded positive psychology there at Penn and then worldwide, and all these institutes at different places to study these great human assets. I actually introduced Sir John and Marty Seligman at the Marriott Hotel in Philadelphia because Sir John loved these virtues, but he wanted scientists to study them and to look at how they could contribute to health. And Marty had been studying learned helplessness in dogs, and he wanted to change to something more positive. So the two of them clicked, and that was where positive psychology was born. And so in the summer of 2000, I had the honor of being part of the first Positive Psychology Summer Institute with people like Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote the book Flow, Bob Enright, Ev Worthington, all these great, great people who were spiritually oriented, but their spirituality really was more of a relational spirituality. It had to do with the quality of our interactions. Not that they were closed-minded about meditation and other such things. They actually, quite a few of them did that. But positive psychology is mainly about human interaction. So I was sitting in my office at the medical school at Case Western, and I got a fax from Sir John, who lived in Lyford Key. We'd known each other for a very long time, and said, Stephen, we need to start an institute that studies the highest human experience of spirituality. And I faxed back, Sir John, what was that? He's probably about 90 years old then. He said, unlimited love, pure unlimited love. And I faxed back, well, Sir John, why don't we start an institute, but should we really call it that? Maybe it's a little too controversial. I'm around a lot of geneticists and so forth, studying Alzheimer's, and what are they going to say about me? So he responded, unlimited love, up to $8.9 million. And I wrote back a fax. I said, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. He would have done the same thing. So we started the Institute, and it's done a lot of things all around the world. But Hopewell is where so much of the social value of the Institute comes into play. And it's really founded on love. And it's the hottest thing in mental health now. There's a whole national organization of Hopewell-like entities. There are probably 85 of them that exist now, mostly along the coast, but also in the Midwest and in the Southeast to some degree, or the South, just the deep South to some degree. And people are realizing that things like schizophrenia are not necessarily incurable. They can be managed well if you give people a stable environment where they're close to nature, where they're not just hooked up all the time with their matrix-like cell phones and all of the things that we call devices. Long ago, by the way, as a kid, I was at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and Steve Jobs slept on my floor before there were any of those white plastic devices that we now have on every table. And we talked about the universe, and we talked about quantum mechanics, and we talked about the nature of ultimate reality and love. And we took a course together called Alchemy 101, just slipping that in. So he was ahead of his time. But that's what the Institute is. It's about this love, not just human love, Sir John said, but the love that made humans, the love that really underlies every wonderful aspect of physical reality. So that's Hopewell, where love and nature come together and people are healed. It's a natural setting. By the way, just so you're aware of this spiritually, the American Psychiatric Association began in Philadelphia. It was founded by a wonderful Quaker named Thomas Scattergood. Hell of a nice name for Quaker, right? Scattergood. I'm going to go Scattergood. And this is like the 1870s. And the 6 original asylums on the East Coast, the Philadelphia Asylum, the Connecticut Asylum, which is now the Institute for Living, McLean outside of Boston, which is still their major clinical site for psychiatry. These were built on large land masses, even 200 or 300 acres. And Olmsted had this strong feeling that somehow we could recover, we could become healthier mentally if we were closer to nature. Think about The Lord of the Rings. Remember Sam Ganges? He can go back to the Shire and he can do pretty well because he's a gardener. But old Frodo, he can't. He has to go wafting off with Gandalf and the elves. There are many literary figures who found their inner peace, their serenity, their self-depth through responding to the spirit of nature. Olmsted himself, Frederick Olmsted, was the great landscape architect of American history who designed all these places. He also designed Central Park. Some of you have walked through Central Park in New York, and you know how beautiful it is. He spent 4 or 5 years designing that. And during some of those years, he was actually a resident at McLean Asylum in Boston because he himself had major issues with these sporadic schizophrenic experiences where his thought just went bonkers. But he always felt that when he reconnected with nature, he could get better. And so one of the things he wrote, he said, I hope for 100 years, and this is true, New Yorkers will walk through Central Park and they will feel greatly relieved. They will be freed of anxiety. They will feel peaceful in their minds and souls and hearts. And they may not realize it, but the person who designed this park relied so deeply on just that kind of natural beauty. So that's what Hopewell is. And it's something I'm very proud of because I had a little bit to do with it in the early years. There's now ARTA, the Residential Treatment Association. People stay in these places for 6 months or so. There's a lot of endowment, but they are also covered by insurance. And then if possible, they'll do inner city farming, at least in Cleveland or in Detroit, because the farming is sort of part of the gestalt. And then they'll come back for, I'll call it, MBA refresher courses every 4 or 5 months. And it's working pretty well. It's actually, again, the hottest thing in the psychiatric treatment of a lot of serious conditions. It's beautiful. It's spiritual. Volunteering itself is incredibly important for health and well-being. We have here at our medical school probably 500 to 600 volunteers at any one point in the hospital. And we let them have a choice. What department do they want to volunteer in? What do they want to do? How much time do they want to spend? They keep journals, they have mentors, and they do debriefing. So volunteering has really come into vogue. When I first got here, from those 20 years in Shaker Heights, Ohio, United Healthcare got in touch. And I'd written a book called Why Good Things Happen to Good People: How to Live a Healthier, Happier, Longer Life Through the Simple Act of Giving. It's a bestseller for a while. How to, why good things happen to good people. Not always, it's not foolproof, don't get me wrong. But as a general truth, it is the case. So United Healthcare wanted to know if we would help with a survey, which we did. So we surveyed about 5,000 adult Americans randomly, and this was in 2009. And well, we surveyed them in early 2010 about their volunteer behavior in 2009. And it turns out that about 41% of Americans were volunteering, and they were volunteering on average about 100 hours a year. So if you wanted to break it down, it could be a couple of hours a week. And then we asked them some questions. Did this improve their sense of well-being? 89% said yes. Did it lower your stress levels? Remember that painting of the golden rule and what Rockwell said. People look peaceful, they look tranquil, he said. 73% said helping others lowered their stress levels. I think it gets your mind off the self and the problems of the self. And then from a spiritual point of view, it frees you from chronological time. You know, if you want to get into the now, one of the best things you can do is focus on serving someone else and get away from your own temporal anxiety. 92% said it enriched the sense of purpose in life. And we know studies of Alzheimer's and memory in people with old age, a high quartile sense of purpose is very much associated with better memory. 68% said, well, you know, volunteering made me feel physically healthier. 77% improves my emotional health. 78% helps recovery from loss and disappointment, resilience. It improved sleeping, friendships, reduced anxiety. It's a great thing. So it's got a lot of attention, and United Healthcare still toys with the idea about prorating insurance based on volunteering, which I think is a really good idea. But this tells you a lot. It's not difficult to understand that people feel better, they're happier, they're healthier, they're flourishing more when they love others. And that shouldn't come as a great surprise.
And Dr. Post, you asked us to give you the timing. We're about 10 minutes to.
Okay, good. Studies on older adults pointing out longer lives in those who are volunteering. They have lower blood pressure. These are interventional research experiments. And I'll go on. In England, they've taken a lot of why good things happen to good people and actually ensconced it into the National Health Service. So they actually connect people in clinics with volunteer opportunities. It's really very exciting to see this. And even a nice article in the New England Journal of Medicine a year ago. So this is catching on. I'm not going to go too much further on this because I want to get to Alzheimer's disease. A lot of people are a little nervous to talk about love, you know, love of chocolate, love of designer jeans. So we talk about the modulations of love: compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, loyalty, listening, creativity. Those are the things that really matter. And in being an Alzheimer's advocate and one who has cared for a lot of people over the years, providing respite and the like, I have to tell you that if you approach them with mindfulness and love, you can do a lot more than you would otherwise. So I want to talk about dignity for deeply forgetful people, and I thank Kirti for sort of hurrying me along. This is the cover. This book just came out this week, and it's partnered with the 36-Hour Day. And I had nothing to do with the cover, but it's sort of opaque, you know, and the idea is that, well, you know, sometimes we think of these people as gone, absent, husks, shells. But actually, if we just notice, that's the term that Larry Rivers taught me. he actually endorsed this book very heavily. If we just notice them more carefully, listen more carefully, we can see these moments where their continuing self-identity comes before us. Purpose is important in preventing Alzheimer's. I like the word deeply forgetful rather than dementia. I rarely use the word dementia because it's such a negative concept. It's a decline from a former mental state. Deep forgetfulness is actually more mystical. It's a very spiritual concept. It's more inclusive. We all have moments on this spectrum. It's respectful. It looks at these individuals as differently abled. It focuses on consciousness as the real point of human value and distinctiveness. I went to Bangalore in 2015, and we actually had a whole conference on people who are deeply forgetful at the Indian Institute for Advanced Studies. And there were about 200 people there. Many of them were India's leading neurologists and philosophers. And I was talking about how I really don't like Western thought because we focus on linear rationality. If you can project plans into the future and operationalize them as an active agent, then you're really a human person. Gobbledygook, because most of our lives we're not doing that, but we're still conscious. We're conscious of the world around us, of one another, of the leaves in the fall. We enjoy music, we enjoy the atmosphere. So consciousness itself is where we should begin, not with rationality. So I was giving this talk, and then came this individual who was in the back of the room, and I had not recognized him, but he put his hand down on the table and he said, yes, it's not rationality that matters. It's not memory that matters, it's consciousness that matters. And that was His Holiness, who hangs around the Institute for Advanced Studies frequently enough, apparently. So you have to look at how historically people with deep forgetfulness have been maltreated in the Western world, terribly so. The T4 program in Nazi Germany, 70,000 individuals with cognitive disabilities, about half of them probably with dementia who are older, are taken out of these institutions, and they're left to freeze in the cold water or laying down on the ice or in the snow. These were the hypothermia experiments that the Nazis perpetrated. T4, Tiergarstrasse 4, 4th Street in Berlin. And they wanted, ridiculously to know at what point it would become futile to send rescue teams into the icy cold waters of the North Atlantic and pull out downed flyers or whomever. There was no justification for this at all. So the Germans themselves ended it. All these people had going against them was deep forgetfulness. They weren't Jews or gypsies or gays or Polish Catholics that discriminated against groups. They were good, shall we say, blue-blooded Aryans, but they were forgetful. And so they could be tortured. And that's really the essence of Hitler's 1939 euthanasia. Again, this ended after about 1.5 years because the German people themselves couldn't tolerate it. And so the very principal investigators in charge of T4 went right to the death camps of Dachau and Auschwitz, and they perpetrated this hideous research on, among others, the Jews. So Leo Alexander, a neurologist of great note, who wrote most of the Nuremberg Code, put this, or he was a medic in Germany, and he looked at how these people were being treated, and he was at the Nuremberg Tribunal, and he wrote this incredible article. It's the most famous article written in American medical history, Medical Science Under Dictatorship, and it's exactly about this idea of life unworthy of life, these sort of gross utilitarian values. So, we fortunately, we don't see that now, but nevertheless, there's a lot of Alzheimer's around, more typically in Blacks and Hispanics than Caucasians per capita. But, in the United States, we have families spend down into relative poverty before they can qualify for benefits. It's a very stark contrast with Canada, Switzerland, the Netherlands. I've been to most of the Good Samaritan outfits across Canada. These are in every province, and they're all supported by the government. And so they provide free long-term care, free hospice. Nobody is pressured economically because one of their loved ones becomes deeply forgetful. Now, by the way, in Quebec, they have preemptive assisted suicide available. I'm not a huge fan, but at least they have an underpinning of secure long-term care, and that's really important. They also have respite benefits, so people can be available just to come in for a few hours in the afternoon and help a caregiver. And all the studies we see indicate that if you just give somebody an afternoon to go to the movies or go shopping or just take a walk in the park, they thrive, they do much better. They don't have an elevation in depression beyond the normal population, which actually does occur in these caregivers. I want to say one thing about Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, as many of you know. Gulliver, this is written in 1726. He comes among a particular tribe of people called the Lugnagians, and every once in a while someone is born and they're immortal. And at first he's really excited about this, but then the king says these immortals, these Strelbrugs, in their eighth decade of life, they lose the common appellation of things. They begin to forget words and terms and names, and they are hated by everybody. So that's that theme of hating the deeply forgetful has a long history. And he started something called St. Patrick's, which is still going on across all of Ireland in every county, where they treat people with dementia with great love and spirituality. He said when St. Patrick's was founded with the 10,000 pounds that he'd gotten from writing, from royalties for writing Gulliver's Travels, he said, you want people from the Dublin area to be in there so that their family members can come and pray with them and spend good time with them and not let them feel abandoned. And there wouldn't be any physical prodding or cooling. No fear, but care. It's a beautiful, beautiful institution. I want to say a couple of things. So if you're into spirituality, you know that what really matters is symbolic rationality, not linear rationality. So linear rationality is not morally important. Linear rationality is the rationality of what we do. Spiritual rationality is the rationality of who we are, not of how we proceed. So de Kooning, the artist, he was an abstract expressionist. We'll get to that. And he painted very intense stuff. One of the most famous artists of the 20th century. He had Alzheimer's, probable Alzheimer's, for 14 years before he passed away. And during those years, he lived in a loft in Greenwich Village, and one of his colleagues would help him because sporadically he would rise up and he'd dip his paint in acrylic, even though he couldn't talk anymore. And he'd go up to the easel and he would paint. And there was a posthumous exhibit of the painting of de Kooning. And a lot of the critics panned it. They say, oh, it doesn't have any of the anxiety or the excitement or the depth of his earlier work. But one reviewer whom I like said, wait a minute, this is a little bit like Georgia O'Keeffe, and this is a guy with dementia. And for all those years, he knew who he was and what he was. He was a painter. So he knew symbolically who he was. And that's why pastoral care can be so important in this population. I've known good pastoral care people who can use beads and chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo with someone who's senile and demented and very old, and they can bring them back into themselves. They can pray a rosary bead. So it's that deeply learned spiritual material that can be very important. And I want to just say that is grandma still there? Well, I think always, because there's creativity, there's symbolic rationality, emotional, relationality, mirth, music, rhythm, smell, taste, touch, spirituality. And incidentally, there's a chapter in my book on dignity for deeply forgetful people called Is Grandma Still There?, which many grandchildren have asked me over the years, because I've been working with this population since the early 1990s. This was a professor of mine at the University of Chicago who won the Nobel Prize, John Eccles. He was a neurophysiologist, and he discovered everything there is basically to know about the synapses, the communication between cells in the brain. And he said, I maintain that the human mystery is incredibly demeaned by scientific reductionism, with its claim in promissory materialism to account eventually for all of the spiritual world in terms of patterns of neuronal activity. This belief must be classed as a superstition. We have to recognize that we are spiritual beings with souls existing in a spiritual world, as well as material beings with bodies and brains existing in a material world. So he did not believe, similar to Thomas Nagel, our greatest living American philosopher, that mind is derived from matter, from brain, from tissue, from an organ. He felt that mind was its own stuff, if you will, and that mind probably preceded matter, and that there's a primacy of mind in the universe and all the thermodynamic constants. Where do these things come from? There's mind in the universe, and all of matter comes from that mind in one way, shape, or form, from sort of original one mind, which is a very Hindu concept. So if you asked me, do I think that people with dementia can ever be gone? The answer is categorically no. I don't believe that. They have all kinds of experiences of lucidity. We call it actually paradoxical lucidity in the literature. And now people are studying it, those unexpected moments of lucidity and communication in individuals with severe dementia who long since stopped communicating. My great mentor, a neurologist named Joe Foley, and I were in Mount Vernon, Ohio, at a psychiatric facility, geriatric psychiatric facility that had a whole wing devoted to people who'd grown old with Down syndrome. And as you know, most people with Down syndrome, by the time they're 50, they have lots of symptoms of dementia as well. And there was a community in Mount Vernon of Hindu nurses and nursing assistants and a couple of doctors. And they took care of these people night and day. It was 24/7. And they were, Joe and I observed it, they were so meticulous. They were so diligent. Joe loved them. By the way, he was the only neurologist who was ever the president of both the American Neurological Association and the American Academy of Neurology. So we're just amazed. So we took 4 or 5 of these folks to a pizza place in Kenyon, Ohio, in Gambier, Ohio, where Kenyon College is located. And we asked them, why do you care so much about these people? Why are you so kind and loving and attentive? And they said, namaste. Meaning, I honor the divine in you as you honor the divine in me. It wasn't because they had linear rationality. It wasn't because they were economically productive or independent or invulnerable, but it was because they had within them that gift of mind, that participation in the universal mind. So we had a nice afternoon with these individuals.
And Dr. Post, we have a really awesome question for you whenever you're ready to
I'm
take.
going to wind up in 2 minutes. Okay.
Yes.
So the National Institute on Aging actually in 2018 put out an RFP on paradoxical lucidity, and people are now studying it very seriously. And in just a second, we're going to listen to Leonard Slatkin conducting the Detroit Symphony. I'm going to skip through a lot of things, playing Aaron Copland's Appalachian Spring. So long as the human spirit thrives, music in some living form will accompany and sustain it and give it expressive meaning. So I'm going to flip through this. I'm not going to talk about dementia dogs or even positive psychology approaches to dementia, although I recommend these things. I'm going to ask Chelsea. Chelsea, are you there?
Yes, she's here. We have only 5 minutes left.
Oh,
And we have a couple of important
okay.
questions.
Well, let's do that. Let's do a
Would
couple of
you-
important questions. Should I stop share?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
We could send the link to everyone if that's okay with you, Dr. Post.
Sure. Just a little 3-minute vignette.
Yes.
Who had dementia, but he could still go to a piano and play those 6 notes, which are the fundamental structure of Appalachian Spring.
Amazing. So Linda asked this question: can you speak to spiritual resilience for families and caregivers as well as the deeply forgetful?
Sure. I think that mindfulness is very, very important. You know, there have been programs across the UK and the US, like dementia care mapping, where a mapper will observe a caregiver's interactions with a deeply forgetful person and make helpful comments about maybe where things could have been handled a little differently, or where things went wrong, or things could go better. And that's very important. But I think that mindfulness is really key. That sort of attentiveness and awareness of negative emotions, which are real, and an ability to project into the future in ways that are consistent with love, and to even imagine situations where forgiveness is relevant, or all those different manifestations of love come into play. Because people, for example, with dementia can be extremely creative. They can do great artwork. They can love music. They can do lots of wonderful creative things. So we've got to really think about love and what that means and its different expressions, but do that with a mindfulness. Do it with a kind of a mantra, if you will. And so keep yourself spiritually centered as much as possible, and that will help.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'd like to read this from Mary Lou, who is a really good friend and wonderful supporter of the foundation. And he's here today. Her mother, who was 100 years old, she passed at 12:45 this morning.
I'm sorry.
And was in the end stage of being deeply forgetful. She had quit eating and drinking and talking. But as Mary Lou sat vigil with her last night, there was one of those moments when she suddenly opened her eyes and made intense contact with Mary Lou's eyes, with her daughter's eyes, and they talked with their eyes. It was a divine moment, and will live inside Mary Lou's soul forever. She's privileged to have experienced what you described. Thank you.
Well, Mary Lou, that's a beautiful example. Exactly. It doesn't mean words, but it means presence and that connectivity that is always there. So when someone has dementia, you can never say that they're not underneath it, that they're somehow gone. Their communication system is broken down. Aspects of their brain have deteriorated. But where are they? You know, they're more than the matter. there, and you know, as the Buddhists like to say, you know, all of our histories and lives are somehow collected in the universe in one particular fashion. So they're there, and your mother, she wasn't gone. She was there, and then at the very end, that was revealed to you as an action of love, I would suggest, that you'll never forget. And that's
Yes.
a beautiful thing.
Yes, it was.
Yes. Well, this is a beautiful sentiment and beautiful moment. And it's time. We are at the end of our webinar today and our program. I hope it was inspiring for you. I learned some really important things, and I feel that at least, if nothing else, for myself, it was very reinforcing the fact, you know, of positive lifestyle choices, what we try to do every day. And so, so I hope that was the same for you. Dr. Post, thank you so very much. We will send everyone a recording and the link to the video that Dr. Post wanted to share with you. It's a beautiful video. So
The link to Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People.
yes, and thank you. Dr. Post kindly donated 4 copies of his new book, brand new book. I forgot about it. And we have the 4 winners. We have Josephine V, Lorna, Jess, and Martha. So we will contact you. We have not even received the books yet, but it should be possibly this week or next week, and we'll send you the books. So thank you, Dr. Post, for donating that.
Oh, yeah.
And congratulations on your new book.
Yeah. And it's a very, you know, it's a very spiritual book. And I think you will enjoy it. It's also very practical for caregivers.
Wonderful, wonderful. We all need it. We all need it. So have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Nice to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Post.